Righty, looks like we still have some folks joining, but we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to our third boot camp session of the Run on Less Electric Depot series. For those of you who are just tuning in for the first time, my name is Rachel Ellenberger and I am the Industry Engagement Manager for the North American Council for Freight Efficiency. Next slide, please. This is our third of 10 sessions that NACFE and RMI are hosting throughout the summer, covering all aspects of fleet depot electrification. For those of you planning to join us on our full journey here, here are the dates of the next sessions, and you can find this schedule available online as well at runonless.com. Next slide, please. If you haven't yet registered for our next session, it will take place on June 13th, where our panel of experts will be discussing the opportunities and challenges of faster charging at 350 kW and higher. Next slide. And before we get started, I'd like to turn it over to our Executive Director, Mike Roth, with an update from the Run planning. Mike.
Thanks, Rachel, and hello, everybody. It's really exciting. Here we are in the third boot camp session already, and we're hearing so much great information and details about how we scale these electric trucks and what's the challenges that these early adopting fleets are having. And actually, first of all, the successes they're having, because there's many successes as they're looking at these electric trucks and then putting the infrastructure in to support them. The boot camp series, we have 10 of these, and we've kind of consciously focused on 7 of the 10 being very much around the infrastructure and how these fleets are scaling, and then 3 of them focused on the trucks, because there's so much exciting things going on with more truck models available and and improvements. We're seeing generation 2, generation 3, generation 4 of some of these trucks. So today it's about the trucks, but I also wanted to share a little bit about how we're doing on the Run planning itself. We announced last month 8 depots in Run on Less Electric, and we now have visits to all 8 scheduled over the months of June and July. So these will be, the NACFE and RMI team going to each of these sites along with a video crew. And we're meeting not only the people who are operating the site. Maybe let me just use the first one. We're going to Schneider. So we'll be working with Schneider, but also with the truck brand, the truck companies that are there. So Freightliner will be joining us, their infrastructure folks, the construction people. We'll be interviewing some truck drivers, the maintenance side of things, and some of the locations will have even a broader involvement where most will have the utility join us to talk about what was done to help with scaling the trucks. And so very exciting, and I expect the next few boot camps that I report on the planning, I'll be either at a site and coming live from one of these locations, or maybe sending in a video. But the run is underway. The planning is we're in process, figuring out all the questions, figuring out how we collect the data. What's the dashboard look like, where we'll be pushing the data out to you all in September. So very exciting times around this. Stay tuned. I would say follow this boot camp, as well as sign up for our newsletter. The newsletter will also contain what events we're at, not only these boot camp events, but other events we'll be talking about the run. So join us, participate as much as you can, share it with your colleagues and other friends, and we'll be giving you some real view of some of these depots in future boot camp sessions. So thanks for that, and I'll let you get on with this session. Take care.
Awesome, thank you, Mike. So a few quick bits of housekeeping before we get started. First, I would like to thank this session sponsor, Volvo. We are so appreciative of your ongoing support for our programs. Next slide, please. As a reminder, this quiz will be available online immediately following this session. So this is going to be your opportunity to test your knowledge from the session and work toward earning your Run on Less Electric Depot Expert Badge. To access this quiz, all you'll need to do is go to the landing page for this session on runonless.com, and you'll see the button to take the quiz there. If you didn't get the chance to take the quizzes from our last 2 sessions, they are both live along with the session recordings, the slides, and the additional resources submitted by our speakers for the last sessions. Next slide, please. A quick reminder that the session is being recorded and will be available online later this week. If you didn't get the chance to submit a question on the registration form and would like to do so during the session, please use the Q&A controls in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And if you run into any technical issues at all, please reach out to Stefan Babcock at GNA, who will help you troubleshoot. And next slide. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. I would like to introduce our moderator, Rick Mihalik, who is the Director of Emerging Technologies at NACFE, who will be leading this discussion and will allow our speakers to introduce themselves as well. Rick.
Thank you, Rachel. The pace of change in battery electric vehicles and zero emission vehicles is just extraordinary now. I've been in this industry over 4 decades, and things are moving just so fast. So let's get into it with our 4 expert speakers today. We'll start with Jesse Lund, then go to Matt Wetta, and then Chad Burchett, and finish up with Ben Sharp. So Jesse, let's go ahead.
Thank you, Rick. Thanks, Mike, Rachel, everyone at NACFE for having me today. I am our truck program manager at CalStart. For those of you not familiar with CalStart, we are a nonprofit dedicated to accelerating clean transportation. And as I said, I'm focused on the truck market. So going to try to provide a quick update of where we stand with respect to electric trucks here in the next 8 minutes or so. We can go ahead and dive in on the first slide. The good news is that thanks to a ton of technological advancement, thanks to investment from government and industry, the electric truck technology has progressed such that there are commercially available electric truck platforms available across all segments of the freight industry. What you're looking at on this slide is from the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, their long-term heavy-duty investment strategy that ranks technology readiness from basically 0 to 9. And you can see here, this is the call out from last year's strategy. Again, each of these segments for on-road vehicles, whether it's trucks or even bus, is now above an 8 with respect to technology readiness, which means it's commercially available. The technology is capable of doing the job of the vehicle. On the next slide, we can see that there are now over 140 different models available, ranging all the way from medium duty cargo vans up through those heavy duty Class 8 day cabs. So a huge variety of options for any fleets on the line. This is from CalStart's Zero Emission Technology Inventory tool. So if you're looking to see what might fit your needs best, I encourage you to check out that tool online. The range of these vehicles is also increasing. So if we go to the next slide, we are tracking what all the specs are for those 140 different vehicles just for the US market. And you can see here a lot of the more medium duty, more urban routes, they tend to have shorter ranges. And so rather than put additional batteries, which are costly and may weigh a lot, onto those, that's why we see the lower range for a lot of those more medium duty vehicles. But you can see this first row, for example, if you look at heavy duty trucks, we've got quite a few zero emission offerings that have a range up to 500 miles. So quite a variety here in terms of capability of these vehicles that are already on the market. On the next slide, you can see how this technological progression has resulted in real world sales. So because of these increasing options, again, the increasing capabilities, we see that we have now deployed over 5,000 electric trucks on the road just in the US. On the next slide, you can see we're really starting to see breakthrough growth for this market. Although it's still a very small percentage of total truck sales each year, it is growing exponentially. In fact, over half of the vehicles that are on the road today, these electric trucks, were placed into service just last year in 2022. The graph you see on this slide is from our zeroing in on zero emission trucks analysis. We released an update to this with all the data through the end of 2022 just this morning. So you're really getting the first glance here. You can see how quickly we're starting to see this line trend upward. If we look at the next slide, you can see that many of these deployments are focused in states that have supportive policies, whether it's advanced clean trucks, that OEM mandate to sell an increasing number of zero emission trucks, or incentive programs. Those are also starting to pop up in more and more states, like many of those that are darker blue here on this graph. Next slide. I also want to mention that CalSTART is tracking real-world data from many of these vehicles through a partnership that we have with the Department of Energy, UC Riverside, Clean Cities, and telematics providers. We are tracking mileage, days in service, and efficiency by segment and by temperature, so the operating climate for these vehicles, for over 160 vehicles across the US. And I know that this Run on Less audience loves real world data. That's why you're interested in Run on Less. And so if we look at the next slide, I will just quickly flag that you can check out all of the data and even download it on the website. There are links to do so here. If you can't screenshot it fast enough, know that, as Rachel said up top, all the slides will be available after the webinar. On the next slide, I will say that while this data helps OEMs continue to improve the vehicle platforms themselves, much of the industry in terms of where we're at today is really now focused on addressing what we call market readiness. So these topics across the top here, whether that's production capacity, are OEMs capable of manufacturing enough trucks to meet demand? Service network could be everything from our technicians trained up to work on these vehicles. Are there robust supply chains in place so that when something does break down, you can get that vehicle serviced, get repairs made as quickly as you would expect for a diesel vehicle, etc. Total cost of ownership, we look at as well with respect to market readiness. So whether that's just base TCO, how does the cost of owning and operating that vehicle over its entire lifetime compare to a traditional diesel truck, for example? We look at that both just the upfront cost as well as with incentives, like in California, the HVIP incentives. So again, I mentioned on that slide with the map that we are seeing incentive programs pop up across the country, often at the state level, and increasingly seeing federal incentives as well. Things like the Clean Commercial Vehicle Tax Credit that was passed through the IRA last year. We also think about things like duty cycle applicability. And what I mean when I say that is, how do these vehicles compare, again, to their historical counterparts, those fossil fueled vehicles? Are they able to meet all of the demands of duty cycles that those diesel trucks are used to meeting? And that could be things like weight. It could be some more niche applications, maybe with, powered takeoff units, things like that. Are they able to carry the same payload related to weight? All of these things are market readiness aspects that we're tracking, as well as what's probably front of mind for many folks, infrastructure. Do fleets looking to deploy these vehicles have affordable access to charging infrastructure, enabling them to keep these trucks up and running? This market readiness snapshot is also from that CARB long-term heavy-duty investment strategy, and it is meant to provide just that, a snapshot of where things are looking good, where there's more work needed. I encourage you to check this out if you would like more information, and I'll note that CARB will be updating this here in a couple months. So stay tuned to see how some of these market readiness indicators have progressed over the last year. If we go to the next slide, I will note that CalSTART continues to work on each of these issues. We've also laid out a plan for a 100% zero emission sales by 2040 pathway in line with our global MOU, which currently has 27 nation signatories and dozens of industry endorser partners. You can learn more if you search CalSTART Global Roadmap on Google, it will come up, but there's lots more there that I can't fit into 8 minutes around how we expect to see this industry transition. And I know that Ben from ICCT will cover what is needed going forward later in the webinar. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Wetta from Peterbilt to provide an OEM perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Next slide, please. All right, good morning for the West Coasters and good afternoon for the East Coasters. My name is Matt Wetta. I'm a National Account Manager for Alternative Powertrains at Peterbilt. The prompt for this session was to discuss where we currently are with EVs, but also where we're going. And so beginning with where we are, at Peterbilt, we like to say that we have the broadest battery electric product offering in the marketplace with 3 currently available models: the 579 EV in short haul and the Class 8 tractor space, the 520 EV in refuse, and the Model 220 EV in pickup and delivery. Next slide, please. We want to offer our customers the whole EV package. And so with that, we can help you with battery electric vehicles, of course, but not just the vehicle. We also offer help and resources to identify and secure grant funding, a broad portfolio of chargers from 20 kilowatts to 350 kilowatts to meet your needs, as well as partnerships to develop the electrical infrastructure required to power them. Next slide, please. One of the things I always advise our customers to do when considering EVs is to utilize them in the applications where they are the best tool for the job. And our strategy in bringing these vehicles to market is well aligned with that advice. We want to target the best applications for EVs and build our way up from there. So speaking of the products we have available today, our longest range vehicle is the 220, which is capable of up to 200 miles on a single charge. Next, the 579 in the Class 8 tractor space, 150 miles on a charge. Then lastly, in the refuse space, about 100 miles on charge in the 520 EV. So range is one big filtering criteria. Secondly, as compared to their combustion engine counterparts, battery electric vehicles, just as a technology, are going to be heavier. And as a result, we want to think about applications that are less weight sensitive, such as cube out, diminishing load, LTL, etc. So our Class 8 vehicles are 6,000 to 7,000 pounds heavier than a similar combustion engine vehicle, and then the medium duties are anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 pounds, depending on the range at which they're spec'd. Lastly, we want to target the routes and applications which really play to the strengths of the technology and minimize its weaknesses. So by that I mean with a diesel vehicle, we're at our most efficient if we can get on the highway and set our cruise and move down the road at a steady state of speed. We really suffer in terms of efficiency when we get into the more start-stop type duty cycles. With an EV, that really plays to its exact strengths. And so those are the places where we want to look first for our first EV routes and applications. With an electric vehicle, we can utilize regen braking. And so as we come up to speed, we're using electricity. When we want to slow down, we turn that motor into a generator, we create electricity, and we slow the vehicle down. In applications such as refuse, where we might be doing as many as 1,000 stops in a day, this strength is a huge one. And this is the place where we look for our first best EV applications. Next slide, please. So with that said, I'll skip to the part everyone is really excited to hear. What is the future of transportation? This is the million-dollar question. Spoiler alert, we don't have all the answers yet, but I will try to share with you what we do know so that you can plan around that and then develop additional strategy as the endpoint becomes more and more clear with time. Next slide, please. So one thing I can say with a high level of certainty is that EV or battery electric vehicles will with certainty be at least a part of the long-term future of heavy-duty vehicle transport. What is less certain is exactly how big of a part. But if we know that for certain EVs will be at least a part of the future of transportation, one thing we can also add to that that's a certainty is that EV takes a long time to deploy. And so this slide walks through what that customer journey typically looks like. If we first started talking today, it's likely that it will take at least 6 months to develop a plan to purchase a first set of vehicles. Next click. Once that's done, it will take at least another 6 months to build and deploy the vehicle and the chargers. From that point, most customers want some time to assess the performance of those vehicles and how they work in their operations. Maybe that's from an infrastructure planning perspective, a range perspective, a service and reliability and TCO perspective, all of those things. And so now you can see we're already a year and a half down the road, and that now we have enough information to really start to plan volume deployments with confidence. From there, you're going to call your utility and you're going to say, hey, I want to put in a much larger EV deployment, which requires a much larger amount of electricity. And in almost all cases, at any kind of scale, that will take at least an additional 18 months to deploy that infrastructure. And so as a result, if we know that EV is a technology which will have a place in the future of transportation, we know that it takes a long time to deploy the charging and the infrastructure for it. One thing we can say with certainty is a good course of action right now today is to begin on planning those first deployments. Start today on your electrical infrastructure so that you're well positioned for this technology into the future. Next slide. That said, as I speak with many of our customers today who are used to diesel, it's common for them to tell me, hey, Matt, this doesn't do everything that I need my trucks to do. What about that? And so this is a little bit of a view of the technology progression we see for EVs and how that might change as we move into the future. So there's really three main things I'll focus on in terms of technology progression. First of all is efficiency. Especially in the Class 8 tractor space, the energy required to go down the road is really dominated by aerodynamics. And so we'll look at how that might change as we move into the future. It used to be, back in the beginning days of trucking, there was a lot of opportunity for improvements in aerodynamics. If we look at today's Class 8 vehicles made by Peterbilt or others, we've really come a long ways from those early days, and our vehicles are very aerodynamically efficient. If we look at our Super Truck 2 program that was recently in the press, or at coming DOE Super Truck programs, it's clear there are still opportunities for improvement. But if we think about this in an 80-20 rule kind of a way, it's likely that the remaining 20% of improvement available, to say it simply, is going to require more and more work and more effort to tune the vehicle to the trailer, et cetera, to really continue to advance in terms of aerodynamics. So we will, of course, be trying to do this, but just to meet our expectations, it's not like this is going to become 2x, 5x better with just a little bit more work. It will become incrementally better. Next, we can talk about battery technology. Again, this is not a brand new thing. Sony first commercialized the lithium-ion battery, which underpins the energy storage in all commercially available EVs, whether in the car space, light-duty space, or the heavy-duty space in 1991. That technology at its core is still the exact same technology we're utilizing in all these vehicles today. Now, since that time, in 3 decades or a little more, batteries have become much more efficient in terms of cost and much longer lasting in terms of cycle life, as well as much more energy dense in terms of the amount of energy they can store in a given size or space. But that said, it's still the same fundamental technology we've been advancing for the last 3 decades. And as such, it's becoming more and more mature. And again, I expect in the reasonably near-term future that will progress incrementally, not exponentially. And so I don't foresee a near-term future where we can put some new fantastical battery into a truck and it'll just magically go twice as far as what a truck will go today with a battery. So again, this is a place where we look for incremental progress rather than exponential growth. Lastly, we can look at charging speed and how quickly we can add more energy to the vehicle in a given period of time, especially in opportunity charging. This is a place that's really fairly nascent. EV charging wasn't even a business to speak of, only 5 or 10 years ago. And even today, I would say there's many players. It's not clear who will be the leader, and there's many changes still happening in terms of the speed and the breadth of product available. And so here we're really using CCS technology, which was pioneered by the auto industry, and it's probably not big enough to do what we really need to do to go to mass adoption in heavy-duty truck. As we look to the future, there's an upcoming standard called MCS, or Megawatt Charging Standard, which enables much faster charging speeds. this is the place where I really do foresee pretty substantial improvement as we look to the future in terms of what we can get done with an EV truck by utilizing faster and faster charging. Next slide. So combining all those things, if we start from where we are today and we say we can go about 150 miles on a charge with a fully loaded Class 8 truck and add about 60 miles in 1 hour of opportunity charging, where do we think we'll be in the future? So next slide or next click. If we combine all the three things we talked about in the last slide, improved aerodynamics, improved energy storage, and much faster charging, this graphic is to scale. And what you should take away from this are two main points. We do expect to be able to go considerably further in a day's time than we're able to go with today's technology. But what you should also take away from that is one big enabler to getting to that future state is, practically speaking, considering vehicle costs and vehicle payload, it's likely that we're going to want to do that with at least one midday opportunity charge that's very fast as an enabler. And so with those two underpinnings, though, it's likely that we'll be able to get to the kinds of ranges we need, even in the Class 8 space, with a battery electric vehicle with some time and some fast charging. Next slide. So if we think about what I just said in regard to EV technology, and we kind of zoom out to what other technologies are available and how will they play in the future, I think NACFE has really done a fantastic job putting the phrase messy middle, and I think it really does well characterize where we are today and where we're going. And I think this will kind of help to set the pros and cons of each technological approach and where we expect those to play. And so starting from our baseline of diesel technology, it's capable of doing everything that we need today, all with one technology. Unfortunately, I think it's going to be challenging for that same thing, one technology wins the day, to be true into the future. Each one will have some pros and cons. And so as we look to the future and think about how these different technologies will change and develop, this is what seems like we foresee. So first of all, diesel, if we use the next click here, will continue to be available and will continue to be able to do all the things that we're currently capable of doing. However, as we work to meet emissions regulations, GHG regulations, and face the ACT and ACF regulations, it's likely that diesel vehicles will continue to become considerably more expensive to meet all those different burdens. Next, EV technology. As I said, I feel very confident that this will be a component of future transportation, at least. What we'll be doing as we look to the future is we'll be working to make that more broadly available in terms of product offering and also in terms of range and payload to meet the needs of more and more customers that are currently doing those jobs with diesel trucks. The challenge there is just getting to the range and the payload that we're used to with a diesel vehicle with the technological limitations of battery electric vehicles. Next click. We also have recently announced we'll be bringing to market a hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicle. This is sort of the opposite start point of EV, and so a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle is much more capable of meeting what we're used to today in terms of range and payload with a diesel vehicle with similar ranges and similar payloads. The challenge here is vehicle and energy costs are much higher. And so that's the big challenge of the fuel cell space. And so as we look to the future and see how this technology might progress, it will also be a player in especially the long range, high utilization applications, but it's likely to continue to be more expensive than the competitive EV technology. And so the question that we have to think about for all of our different applications is which technology is really the best tool for the job that I need to do in my routes and in my applications, and what's the right set of range, payload, and cost trade-offs for those applications. And so last slide, as Peterbilt, we will continue to do what we've always done, and that is bring the absolute best technological options and the best vehicle options to market for our customers to do the jobs that you need to do every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, for that. That was well said. My name is Chad Burchett. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Trova Commercial Vehicles. We're based in Dublin, Virginia. And if we go to the next slide, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our management team. We have a combined level of who you see on the slide of 285 years of automotive experience. So we like to refer to ourselves as a young company with experienced people. So if you have any questions after this about anything that I state, please feel free to email me at the email listed there. And feel free to look us up on LinkedIn. We love to hear from folks. Next slide. So the pain points that everybody's been feeling, we all understand that we've got the regulatory pressures, environmental concerns, there's business advantages to go zero emission. But when I talk to end users, it comes down to vehicle cost, performance, weight. Can I get the vehicles? The lead times, if I can get a vehicle, can be quite long. And so the industry is really distracted right now because you've got to be able to understand that you've got to keep up with diesel, biodiesel, RNG, CNG, LNG, hydrogen ICE, hydrogen fuel cell, and then of course battery electric. So it's very difficult to have one platform that meets all these needs. And what the industry really needs to reach the economies of scale is to have dedicated factories for the different technologies. So if we go to the next slide, some of the technologies that are coming. So I'd like to give you a rough date in the crystal ball here. By Q2 of 2025, you should see a lot of repowering solutions available on the market. And the benefits of repowering are obviously a lower cost, but also an improved payload. And also, when you look at this, from the time that it takes to get the vehicles themselves, because it can be done on existing assets. So this should be available across all platforms of Class 8 chassis in the market, as well as Class 6 and 7. So you should have like either two ways of doing this, a skateboard chassis like the one you see on the right-hand side of the screen, or you could even have component kits. So these repowering, if we think about the skateboard chassis, if you have a diesel truck coming to one bay and you have a skateboard chassis in another, you essentially remove the cab, hood, and bumper, engine, after treatment system, and so on, and the front and rear axles. You recover 50% of the original vehicle, transferring it over to the skateboard platform. Then 40% of the vehicle that you remove the components, you can then resell those. And then roughly about 10% of what's left can be recycled. So this can be accomplished in roughly 48 working hours inside that bay. So you're looking at just under 2 weeks once the skateboard chassis is delivered to your local dealer, or if you're a large carrier, if you're authorized to do this by one of the OEMs that offer this solution. Go to the next slide. One of the inherent benefits that you'll see a lot of OEMs in the upcoming future, say around 2025 timeframe, is by redesigning with a purpose-built chassis, you can get much more efficiency based on your payload. So if you see on this slide, diesel reference of 14,150 pounds. Today's battery electric trucks can be quite heavy compared to their diesel counterparts. But when you think about a bespoke chassis, now you can actually see that it is possible to have parity with diesel, even with a battery electric vehicle. It all depends on how many batteries you want to add to it. Now, even if you want to add more batteries with the bespoke chassis, then you can still get more efficiency, more range from having a specific design. Now, for some applications, it might be good to balance the battery size with your charging opportunities, whatever they may be. So then let's talk about other ways of increasing efficiency. If we go to the next slide. For many years, permanent magnet asynchronous motors have been around. And about the normal efficiency you'll see from these volumetrically is about 2 kilowatts per liter. So at 2 kilowatts per liter, when you start to look at future technology, you can see axial flux motors have been out there for some time, but just not a lot of commercial use. Well, around the same time in Q2 of 2025, now you'll see axial flux motors making a big run in the trucking industry. Now, the cool thing about axial flux motors are that here you have about 16 kilowatts per liter of output from an axial flux. That's almost 8 times increase in power for the density that you have for your motor. So this is lightweight, it's less magnets that are utilized. And of course, as you can see, the power levels are fantastic for continuous and peak power outputs. So it gives you a very good high volumetric efficiency. Now, when you think about charging, even in Q2 of next year, there are a lot of great inductive wireless charging solutions that are available out in the market. These have nice in-ground installations. You know, in mega sites, you can see this up to 600 kilowatts of charging capability. And then, of course, if you're away from your site or your port or wherever this wireless inductive charging technology is, you can always use CCS1 currently, or in the future when MCS comes available, you can use that as well. It's all compatible with these wireless charging capabilities. So if you're away from home, it doesn't leave you stranded by not having a wireless charger somewhere else. Then if we go to the next slide. So when you think about batteries, of course, batteries are the biggest cost on the vehicle, and they're the things that people are thinking the most about. So you might have a second life of the batteries, potentially on a trailer, powering the trailer components and accessories. It could be even a range extension device. Then you could see batteries go into a third life as solar energy storage. So once they go beyond solar energy storage, now you're talking about state of health around 50%. So it's not a whole lot of use to a lot of folks. It's been, 10 to 12 years of calendar aging. Now it's time to grind those batteries into black gold, as we call it in the industry. Here you can extract the raw materials and you can recover about 95% of that original material. Now this is fantastic because then what you recover, you can actually make new cells. Now, of course, 10 years down the road, you might have different cell chemistries, but all these elements are key and vital to keep from having to mine new elements from the earth. And so here you're already seeing companies like Lithion, Li-Cycle, Redwood Materials already up and running. And by the Q2 of next year, if you had old batteries that you needed to recycle, you would see hydrometallurgy utilized to extract those elements back from those cells. So that's just a little taste of how things could go here in the future. And now I'd like to hand it over to Ben Sharp from ICCT to tell you a little bit more from them.
All right, thank you so much, Chad. Before I launch in, just wanted to really thank NACV, the team there, so much for the opportunity to share some thoughts on the session today. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the ICCT, the International Council on Clean Transportation, we're a nonprofit research organization, and we primarily work to empower governments with research and data to make policies for clean fuels and vehicles. So next slide, please. So a lot of the themes that I want to touch on, Jesse, Matt, and Chad have already gone through, so I'm going to do my best to err on the side of brevity so that we can get into questions and discussion. But I think Jesse did a really great job of kind of walking through where we're at in the market. We at the ICCT, we're also tracking developments with great interest. But I think one of the key things that I wanted to impart on you, and this is something that the previous speakers have said too, but I think that there's quite a ways to go before we have a wide range of vehicles to meet all the great variety of applications and body types and styles. And certainly I think it's quite fair to say that for the vast majority of applications at present, zero emission trucks are not offering a one-to-one replacement versus the diesel or gasoline baseline. So absolutely, we've seen tremendous progress in the past 5 to 7 years. I think that graph that Jesse showed is really quite powerful to show just how far things have come. But despite that, I think we're certainly still in the early days. So when we look at this slide and all of you know what great variety there is across the heavy duty trucking landscape. So we're seeing lots of models, we're seeing legacy OEMs, lots of startups. Chad just talked about a really exciting repowering opportunity from his company. So that this is all really positive developments. But in terms of kind of transforming the market, we really see the need for continuing development, which we of course expect to see. But not only on the OEM side, but also on the upfitter side, particularly when you're thinking about work trucks and all of the various, PTO and different flavors of work trucks that we need in the market. Whether that's cement trucks or utility trucks, bucket trucks. We're just starting to see some zero emission models trickle into those applications. And we're expecting to see lots more in the coming years. So next slide, please. And this is something that's fairly obvious, but I think it really bears repeating. Cost is really everything. These aren't just cool science projects. These fleets are going to have to put these trucks into service, and they're going to have to be able to do the job, be reliable, and to help these fleets make a return on investment. So our group has been doing a lot of cost analysis in the various markets that we work at. This figure comes from a study that we recently released looking at long haul trucking and zero emission options for long haul trucking in the US. And for this particular scenario that we looked at, we looked at a situation for California for Class 8 trucking. We did some analysis to see what we think could be the break-even points as we go out to 2040. So you can see there that the diesel is kind of the baseline at the bottom there. And you can see the battery electric, which is shown with the blue curve there, starting to kind of cross over and become cost competitive in kind of the 2030 timeframe. And we also looked at both hydrogen fuel cell as well as hydrogen internal combustion to kind of round out the analysis. And as Matt said, we're definitely of the mind that in this particular circumstance, looking at a green hydrogen application, we see that those costs are quite a bit higher than the battery electric instance. So let's move to the next slide, please. But with that said, I think that one of the messages that I think is really important is to keep in mind that there's just a tremendous variety in the trucking sector, and so I think that there's plenty of room for both of these fuel options, so both batteries as well as hydrogen. I think that that there's certainly applications where batteries are going to make most sense, and then vice versa is also true. We see those instances where hydrogen is just providing a lot more value for the customer. So for this particular slide, I just wanted to share a figure from that same cost study on long-haul trucking in the US. In these figures, we have model year 2030 truck on the left and a model year 2040 truck on the right. And what we have is on the y-axis, we have a price for green hydrogen. And on the x-axis, we have the charging cost for electricity. And what we wanted to do was to try and show kind of a break-even plot. So on the bottom half of the figures are the places where fuel cell trucks are cheaper. And conversely, on the top part of the figure, it's where we think battery electric technology is going to make more sense from a TCO perspective. So what we found in this particular analysis, and again, I just want to emphasize that there's lots and lots of variables here, but for this particular set of inputs, we found that battery electric trucks are going to be cheaper for most of the electricity ranges in price that we see in the US. But this is certainly by no means a generalization to say that battery electric trucks are always going to be better. As I said, we certainly think that there's room for all of these technology variants, and not just batteries and hydrogen. We think that there's a role for natural gas, for biodiesel, So it is indeed the messy middle. I think that that's a really apt description of where we are in the trucking sector. So to be determined. That I think all of our crystal balls are quite murky. But I think the one thing that we can say with confidence is that we're going to continue to see a role for all of these fuels and technologies going forward. So next slide, please. So one of the things that we of course think is really vital to all of this is infrastructure. You know, certainly it's the case that for both battery electric as well as hydrogen technologies, you're going to need to have a really significant deployment of new infrastructure. And not just new infrastructure, because of course electricity is everywhere, but specifically charging points that are specific for medium and heavy duty trucks. So one of the things that we've been putting a lot of focus on as a team is to try and do some estimates and trying to figure out both where we're going to need the infrastructure, but what type of infrastructure and what that rollout will need to look like over time. So we wanted to focus on kind of the early market, and we really think that the next 5 to 7 years are going to be really critical for building up this early market for zero emission trucks. So what we did was did some analysis, very detailed, looking at trucking operations across the country in the lower 48 states. And we wanted to look at where we think trucks are going to need to charge and refuel. And what this figure shows is our assessment of where we think, and this is an electricity example, but where we think are going to be the most critical needs for charging specific for medium and heavy duty trucks. So you can see on the left-hand side, this is for 2025. Again, the market is we think is going to be pretty early. But you can already see some metropolitan areas that are that really light up in terms of where we think the infrastructure will be needed. No surprise that Southern California, the Los Angeles area, the ports are already seeing a lot of adoption of zero emission trucks. But other places around the country, you know, in Texas, Salt Lake City, Cook County, near Chicago, South Florida. And then when you move to 2030, you of course would expect a lot more deployment of electric trucks and the associated charging that's going to be required. So we were really, you know, quite happy to be able to have these estimates out in the public. We're really doing our best to really engage with a range of different stakeholders. As you all well know, this is a really an incredible mix of stakeholders that are involved with electric trucks, including utilities, which, you know, for us is kind of a new stakeholder group that we're trying to engage. But we wanted to use this study as a way to try and communicate where we think those charging needs are going to be most acute over the next 10 years. Just to put some numbers on things to give you some perspective. So by 2030, we estimate that there will be a need for about 140 gigawatts of additional electricity to support medium and heavy duty electric trucks. In terms of overall retail sales of electricity, that 140 gigawatts represents about 1% of the US total electricity use. So certainly, you know, it's definitely significant, but it's not going to be, you know, in our estimation, an over the top or it's not an impossible thing to do, is what we're finding. So that's our message to utilities is to start thinking about this yesterday. But it's just you know, it's a paradigm shift for them, you know, getting to think about deploying electricity in new and different ways is quite a challenge for any industry. So we're, you know, working as much as we can with several partners in the utility sector. And just another number that I think is quite interesting. There are over 3,000 utilities in the US, and you can imagine that there's a really wide range of experiences and attitudes and expectations around electric vehicles, but electric trucks in particular. So we certainly have our work cut out for us. Next slide, please. So just to quickly touch on this, we also wanted to look at the long haul trucking sector in particular. So as you can imagine, we think that long haul trucks are going to need an outsized portion of publicly available charging for those trucks and fleets that don't have a return back to base type of operation. So we wanted to do some estimates as to where and how much charging and refueling infrastructure will be needed along these really significantly important freight corridors. So that was part of our analysis as well. So next slide, please. Well, I think that that's all that I have. So I thank you so much for your attention, and we'll turn it back over to Rick for questions and discussion.
Great, thank you, Ben. We've got a number of questions that have come in around total cost of ownership. All of you kind of talked a little bit to it, but Jesse, particularly in TCO calculations, how is infrastructure included, not included when you're comparing to diesel vehicles?
Great question. It really depends on what TCO calculator you're looking at. Some include the upfront cost to deploy chargers, some do not. They'll just include the per kilowatt hour charge for electricity. So I would just say it's really important to pay attention to those details, however you're doing your TCO calculation.
Great. Chad, you talked a lot about where the technology is going, along with Matt. Tomorrow's truck is always better than today's, usually. So why do customers want to buy a truck today rather than waiting for the next better truck tomorrow?
Right. Well, one of the main things that you can accomplish by getting a truck today is gaining that experience, getting used to electric, working with the drivers, driver education, getting your technicians trained up and how to service the vehicles. But when you think about the future, you know, and what we'll see, that even today's vehicles, there's going to be opportunities to utilize the existing designs and push them further along. I made a short reference to potentially having, you know, range extenders that can potentially benefit that of existing electric architecture trucks from today. There's a lot of patents that are out there already where people are pushing this to do this, and then you can take your existing asset and then have it live a much longer life and going into different environments that it wasn't meant for to begin with. So instead of a return to base operation, you might see some of today's tractors having range extenders that can go out into you know, the realm of an 8-hour to 11-hour shift. So it all depends on how you look at it from that standpoint, is that it's worth taking the risk to get the training, the service people there, all the community colleges working to get the next generation of technicians. That's not something that's going to happen overnight. We basically need to educate ourselves around the entire industry of how to embrace electric. And of course, when you talk about other technologies like hydrogen trucks are battery electric trucks with a hydrogen range extender. So the technology is essentially the same as far as the driveline and propulsion. And so we need to get our feet into the water and make sure we understand and get people trained up so that we have a nationwide workforce that can help keep these units in operation.
Good answer, Chad. Matt, you talked a lot about the messy middle and the complications of all these different technologies being developed in parallel. What sort of things can be done to help the fleets decide which technology is the right one for their particular duty cycle? And are those going to be different depending on what part of the country you're in?
I think the biggest thing is just range, payload, and operational cost. I mean, that's what's driving all of our decisions. And there are some considerations depending on where you are that may relate into that. So as an example, we found a lot of success with EV vehicles in the Quebec area of Canada. And it's interesting, in Quebec, they have very expensive diesel. They have very cheap hydroelectric power, and they also have good EV grant incentives. And so you stir all three of those together and you end up with a really beneficial for EV TCO. And so that, especially electricity cost and diesel cost, the energy component there is considerably variable depending on where you are. And so it's a thing that we work every day to try to help our customers understand what the right choice is for them. And so be happy to work with anybody on that.
Thanks, Matt. Ben, you talk a lot about the fact that infrastructure is integral to the success of these vehicles. In terms of how do we jumpstart the infrastructure? What does the industry need to do to get the infrastructure built out so that the trucks can actually operate?
Yeah, Rick, that's the question. And I think that one of the things that we're trying to communicate to various groups that we speak with is to try and get some early wins. And I think that's why this boot camp program and project is so critical, right? We see that virtually all of the deployments of infrastructure are happening at depots. And I think that's where all of the early learning is going to come from, in terms of how these trucks operate, how they charge, what the behavioral patterns that we're seeing. But in parallel, we also have to be thinking and planning for publicly available charging and refueling, for these fleets that are going to need that on the go, and for fleets, the smaller and medium companies that frankly, just won't have the appetite or the resources to install their own charging. So we really think that in order for this to be electric trucks to be a solution for the entire industry, public charging is going to have to be there, be robust, and be reliable. So it's a huge undertaking, no doubt, but I think that this study that we just completed has really helped us to figure out, what are the really critical areas and corridors where we need to focus. So I think the next step for us is going to be really to pinpoint in on those areas and to work with the utilities and stakeholders in those communities to try and get some of these, early first deployments of publicly available charging for trucks. And yeah, there's no other way to do it than to just get out there and do it. And it's certainly a risky venture, but that's why we think there's a really important role for government to try and provide some subsidies and help to mitigate that risk.
Okay,
I totally agree with Ben. Sorry, Rick, to jump in, but just real quick, I just want to say I totally agree. And I know we've been focused on the trucks, the vehicle platforms themselves when we talk about electric truck developments here today. But I'll also note we're seeing some really interesting developments in terms of innovative business models, namely the as a service type business models, whether it's the full trucks charging everything all in, or even that charging as a service business model that we're seeing gain popularity to help address some of these gaps, particularly for those smaller fleets that Ben just mentioned.
Okay, I appreciate everybody's time this morning, and I'm going to return the podium here to Rachel to close us out.
Awesome. So that is going to wrap up our third boot camp session. Thank you everyone again for joining us today. Remember to go back to the landing page of this session on runonless.com to take the quiz. It is available now, and be sure to connect with us on social media. Stefan, if you'll go to the next slide, all of our social media handles are available. And make sure that you join us for our next session. It's going to be on June 13th. It's going to be moderated by Rob Graff on our team, and he and his panel of experts are going to be discussing opportunities and challenges for faster charging. So thank you so much again. Thank you to Rick and our panelists, and we will see you in the next one. Have a great day.